Today I'm here with Dr. Patrick Mendes and his wife Dr. Antonina Mendes. We are here to talk about the US-China rivalry in the Indian Ocean and its possible consequences for Sri Lanka. Dr. Patrick Mendes is a presidential advisor to the National Security Education Board of the US Department of Defense. He was appointed by the Biden-Harris White House, and he has previously served as a commissioner to UNESCO at the US Department of State and a military professor at NATO and Indo-Pacific Command of the Pentagon. Dr. Mendes has also served under 5 American presidents. Dr. Antonina Mendes is a former Fulbright Senior Scholar at Indiana University in the United States and an assistant professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. Dr. Mendes and Dr. Antonina, it's lovely to have you here with us today. So tell us, in a recent article published by you both at the Australian Institute of International Affairs, you both wrote about China's Dragon and Phoenix strategy. From what I understand, the Dragon side of it is the more assertive and the Phoenix side of it is the softer, the more cultural related side of things. Could you elaborate more on this for us, please?
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you for the Daily Financial Times and the crew for having us for this conversation. Basically, when we wrote about this one, we wanted to capture how China thinks about themselves and how they are projecting their strategy to the world in a very stealth, very secretive, very hidden way. So we thought in order to explain that, we need to have a Chinese metaphor, because the Chinese metaphor is we use the dragon and phoenix. Yes. I think Dr. Antonina will explain to you a little bit later. Let me premise our argument in our article. We thought China has 2 strategies going on. One is the northern route in the northern Silk Road, that going in the reflection of the Tang Dynasty, coming from the ancient capital of China in Xi'an to going westward all the way to Europe. And the other one is in the Ming Dynasty that started from the Admiral Chung He, who came to Sri Lanka 6 times out of 7 visits. And there he came to what they call the Western Ocean, rather than Indian Ocean. With their language, in their literature and poetry, they talk about Western Ocean, not the Indian Ocean. So we wanted to capture this one, how this is translated into the Chinese foreign policy and strategies in the Indo-Pacific region. So we thought the best way to explain this one is to this metaphor, Chinese metaphor. Dragon represent the water, this blue dragon. Blue dragon started from this reflecting the Ming Dynasty, Admiral Chung He's time, coming to the South China Sea, to the Indian Ocean, all the way going to the eastern part of Africa. So that is the dragon aspect of blue dragon. And then the phoenix, on the other hand, is coming from the above. It's just like American eagle. So eagle, American phoenix in the Chinese metaphor, is we are talking about the China's power in the cyber aspect, space, and their expertise and technology in the, for example, going to the far side of the moon, and the supersonic technology. So that reflects the phoenix part, the flying bird, if you were to say that way. So we thought this way, this is a Chinese strategy is twofold. One is South China Sea that represents the Ming Dynasty. Northern part is going on the terrestrial part, and it is also representing the phoenix. So we thought if we explain these two together, it is much easier for the non-Chinese audience to understand how China thinks about their strategy and mindset as larger part of President Xi Jinping's rejuvenation of Chinese nation. So I think Antonina has a different way of looking at this one. She can expound it on a little bit that aspect as well.
Indeed, it's a kind of mythological pair, you might say, animals which are associated with the emperor, and actually using those signs was forbidden for normal citizens in the past. So it was only associated with the very elites at the court. Moreover, we kind of struggled initially with coining the name for the strategy. We decided to call it a blue dragon strategy, or blue dragon and the phoenix strategy. Why the dragon? Of course, dragon exists in various mythologies and legends around the world. However, medieval European dragons are different from Chinese dragons. So dragons from medieval European legends are associated with fire, whereas the ones from Chinese mythology are associated with water. That's why we did decide to use dragon as a symbol for this water expansion of China. However, interestingly, dragons in Chinese mythology are peaceful creatures. They usually help people, unlike dragons from European legends. So maybe this is something to think about and actually leave to decide for our audience whether this is a peaceful dragon or maybe not really such a peaceful one. What is also very important to add is, apart from the sea waters or ocean waters, we also included into our strategy the rivers and lakes. So China's domination over various rivers which start from Tibet, which flow out from Tibet and flow down through countries such as India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and of course Southeast Asian countries, nations along the riverbanks of the Mekong River. This is extremely important because China has been for many years developing a river dam system, river dams which serve as power plants. So they produce energy, which China is so much hungry for because of its economic development. However, at the same time, it has heavy consequences for countries down the stream because China is able to divert water, store water, causing possible droughts or at least a significant water level drop on rivers down the stream. On the other hand, China can, let's say, turn on the taps and then cause kind of a flood even, causing or affecting very negatively countries down the stream. In fact, that did happen in the past already. In 2020 and 21, China, without warning, turned off the taps on river dams on the Mekong River, and the level of water on Mekong River dropped 1 meter. That was a disaster for agriculture, for farming, for transportation in countries along the riverbanks of the Mekong River. So we can already see that potentially China might use water as a political weapon. Actually, our idea is that, and this is nothing revolutionary, that of course China is trying to in a way sandwich India, right? So it's sandwiching India from the south. There's also a very interesting theory about the string of pearls, right? Even though China has never admitted officially that such a strategy exists, right? But if you actually connect the dots, you can see that China for many, many years has been trying to develop these kind of economic alliances, let's say, with friendly countries in the Indian Ocean. And it seems that the only country which is not that much friendly toward China in the Indian Ocean is India itself. However, when it comes to the northern belt, let's say, India is definitely threatened in the Himalayas by Chinese pressure. What we are trying to stress in our views, in our articles, is that it's not just the border conflict itself that has been going on since 1949 or 1950, if you want to be more precise, when the PLA annexed Tibet and when this Tibetan buffer zone ceased to exist, right? And when the Chinese and Indians actually started to stand eyeball to eyeball for the first time. It's also water. And probably water in the next 20, 30 years will become the issue number one After all, we live in the times of the global climate change. When climate is becoming more violent, we have much more violent droughts or floods in some parts of the world. So weather is becoming more and more unpredictable, more violent, and of course more disastrous for human beings and all living creatures, to be more precise. So control over water will be more valuable than control over oil resources or any other natural minerals or natural resources. So this, we believe, might become the most important, most heavy political and economic weapon against all countries in South and Southeast Asia.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Antonina. Dr. Mendes and Dr. Antonina, in your previous writings, you have both described Taiwan and Sri Lanka as two unsinkable aircraft carriers. Could you explain what you have meant by this?
Well, sometime I've been thinking about how to explain this China's strategy about Taiwan on the East China Sea and China's strategy for the Sri Lanka. And there are two different strategies working at two places. One is China wants to take Taiwan back, thinking this is their own territory. Okay, it is. They claim that it was a part of the Qing dynasty, and they want to take it back if not by force. So Sri Lanka has, on the other hand, 2,500 years has a Buddhist diplomacy and cultural exchanges. Sri Lanka has a different kind of relationship. It is a more of a economic Buddhist culture exchanges, which I call the Buddhist diplomacy. It is working perfectly fine. It is manifested by, right now, Lotus Tower. So nobody is going to argue, especially the Buddhist monk, no is going to argue against China. So they have another strategy to get Sri Lanka's side and take into the China side. It's naturally they successfully done with the Hambantota to Colombo Port City and to the Lotus Tower and Matale Airport and everything. Now Dragon and Phoenix are working here perfectly fine. And now underneath this one, the Buddhist diplomacy at work. So nobody is arguing about it. So that is the one part of it. So this idea of the unsinkable aircraft carrier came up with after the World War II. American General Douglas MacArthur, after the war, he said, we need to protect Taiwan. It is unsinkable aircraft carrier for Americans. That means it is, unlike the aircraft carriers floating, this one unsinkable. It's a land itself, island. Remember, Taiwan is 1/3 of Sri Lanka in central land, but the same number of people, 22 million roughly. Sri Lanka is 3 times larger on the other hand, but it's a pretty much a similar kind of climate and the landscape, and Buddhism is dominant of both countries and very peaceful islanders. Okay, so this one in the unsinkable aircraft carrier for Douglas MacArthur was catched on in Washington. It says the reason is because after the World War II, they were afraid that the Soviet Union and the communist China is going to take over the Southeast Asia. And it would probably spread it out the rest of the Asia and the entire region going to be the communist. So therefore, in order to stop that one, America has to be present. Thus, here comes the unsinkable aircraft carrier for America. So when I think about that's the same metaphor that Douglas MacArthur, General MacArthur used, I said, wait a minute. Now China is doing to the Sri Lanka with the Hambantota and Matale Airport and Colombo Port City. This is Sri Lanka is China's unsinkable aircraft carrier. So they can fly in and take all the military ships. This is a dual purpose, both military and civilian purposes. They can use their bases because Of course, now you sold out the Hambantota for 99 years, and even if you wanted to go there, we get to have the approval from the Chinese and also the Colombo port city. It is not belong to the Sri Lankan. You need to get a special permission. We were there in Hambantota a few days ago. Our military escort said, "Sir, we cannot go there." I said, "Why?" "Because it's your country." No, it's belong to Chinese. So you see the mindset is kind of sinking in. This country belong to Chinese. So this is here we have the another unsinkable aircraft carrier. We wrote this one saying there are two unsinkable aircraft carriers in the Indo-Pacific region. And one is Taiwan and the Sri Lanka. One belong to the Americans, other one belong to the Chinese. So we thought this is the best way to explain by looking at the historical evolution, what happened in the past. So this was published at the Johns Hopkins University SAIS Journal of International Affairs. And then many people said that, of course, makes sense. So we've been asked and quoted and talk about that the Sri Lanka being another unsinkable aircraft carrier. So we were very happy to say that that was caught on because there are historical connections to both, but different strategies, different contexts. But in terms of these two aircraft carriers, it's like a bookend. One is on the Pacific Ocean, they have Taiwan, and in the Indian Ocean, we have Sri Lanka. So in between, everything is South China Sea. And in between is where the China wants to have a full control. That created problem with the Americans' ideas about what America believes. US foreign policy is based on rule-based international order, which China doesn't like. They wanted to have their own rules, which is dictated by Beijing. And then Americans wanted to have a freedom of navigation and the openness of the sea line. So there is nobody controlling the ships, cargo ships going through the South China Sea. And this is become a huge problem for the fishermen in the Philippines. They were harassed by the Chinese fishermen, Chinese Coast Guard, and in Philippine waters. So America has to provide defense mechanisms in order to maintain the American idea of the rule-based international order and to the freedom of navigation in the international waters. So therefore, this is a part of this rivalry in terms of the maritime aspect is concerned. And also this is also concern for the American and the Indian and also the Australian and Japanese and other Quad countries, South Korea included, and to the freedom of navigation in these waters should be belong to the global common. It's not dictated by Chinese. So this is the part of this rivalry going on, whether you want to have a rule-based international order or dictated by one country.
Dr. Mendes and Dr. Antonia, you have very successfully covered the financial and many various other aspects of this situation. But I would like to ask, how do historical, cultural, and ideological factors influence China's geopolitical strategies, particularly in its relationship with India and the United States?
That's an excellent question. If you look at the evolution of the Chinese history and the governance, it is one dynasty to another. They came in, overthrown, and another dynasty came. Roughly, there are about 300 years. And then in between this one, there are two dynasties, not really Chinese. One is Yuan dynasty, that was pretty much a Mongolian dynasty, and the other one is called the Qin dynasty, the last dynasty. It is from the Manchuria. So other than that one, this is a dynasty ruled the world, China. So that is the historical part, and it is a cultural part. They are also afraid of the invasion because of the two dynasties. Pretty much Yuan dynasty 300 years, another one is 300 years, Qin dynasty. They are very afraid of other people coming to take over, because also the 100 years of century of humiliation by the Western powers and plus Japan. So therefore China felt now their time has come to be a great power, because this is no longer they are going to be bossed around by the other countries and invaders. So that is the cultural and historical part. And then evolutionary part of the ideology came in because of the Communist Party came in, and then the Qing dynasty fell, and the Republic of China came to be under Dr. Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek. And then during the Civil War, afterward Mao Zedong came into power. So during that time onward, Chairman Mao Zedong's time onward, China became a communist and the Marxian. So you can see this is three ideas, the historical evolution of the dynasties, and then the autocratic rule of the communism, and also the Leninism, all fitting into the Communist Party. So that is why China wants to have the Chinese Communist Party with Chinese characteristic. It's not like Russia or the Soviet Union, but they have a Chinese characteristic. So therefore, this is their evolution of the civilizational state. So they are continue to be acting like a civilization dynasty in a modern civilizational state. India, on the other hand, a different kind of civilization. She can explain to about, she knows the Indian civilization more than I do. And Sri Lanka also look at it in a Sri Lankan context. It is also civilizational island, because many kings and queens came in and ruled the country. On the other hand, America is the first country ever made, created by men. No women, by the way. They are the founding fathers who are enlightened founding fathers, created a new nation, is the kind of the promised land. For anybody from anywhere in the world, come find the freedom there. So American basis is, this is the land of freedom, land of liberty. This is where the freedom reign. So this is the another kind of ideology. Individual freedom, liberty is more paramount than the collective consciousness of the Chinese Communist Party. It is not the party. So, for example, when you talk about the American dream, it is an individual dream. Thomas Jefferson talked about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's the individual, your happiness, not the government happiness. China, when they talk about the China dream, it is the happiness for the Communist Party. Communist Party is happy, not the people. So there is a huge difference with this ideology. So America is based on created by men, because America was previously been ruled by also the British. Then we didn't like the British. We had the war, American Revolution. We kicked them out. So we don't want to be like British. So that is why at that time founding fathers found the inspiration for the development and prosperity of the Chinese civilization, Confucius civilization, because they have the high morale and they look for the Chinese for the inspiration rather than the European, because they didn't like the European powers. So they thought America is a new country for the freedom-loving people to come. Anybody come from anywhere, they can become American. You cannot find anywhere in the world. You cannot go to China or to Germany or to Russia. You never become Russian, German, or the Chinese. But in America, you can go there, I'm American. So proud to be an American. You see, this is the freedom. That is the power of freedom, individual liberty. You can exercise because you are born with it, freedom. And my party, whether it is a Democratic Party or the Republican Party, does not and cannot dictate my freedom. That is not the case of China. That is where the Chinese people are afraid to talk against the government. In my country, I can criticize our policies, our parties. This is what America is. So that is the ideological, historical, and cultural orientation. This is what is the ultimate rivalry is all about. Whether you want to live it in a country that dictate your freedom, take your freedom out, tell you what to do, or you can have an American. You have the freedom to whatever you want to be, wherever you want to go free. So this is the beauty of the American dream, the individual dream, the liberty, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So that is what is the difference. So, for example, President Biden or even Vice President Kamala Harris asked the question whether do you want to live in a democracy or you want to live in a autocracy. This is the ultimate question when you ask, even when the Russia invaded Ukraine, you need to ask, do Ukrainian people want to live in the dictatorship of Russia, or you want to live it like a European freedom-loving countries in the European Union? So she can tell you about it because her country went through this is all the process to the communism and to the freedom finally. So you can say about how your parents and how they to appreciate this freedom. You know, I mean, you can see it in during Sri Lanka went through the Mrs. Bandaranaike's time. They ate basmati rice, and we have to eat Sri Lankan local rice. And they have a salmon and sardine, and we have to eat the tilapia and local fish in the Parakma Samudra, the tank. So this is the kind of world when the party and the rulers can live their own world at the expense of the people. You wanted to have that kind of country, communist or the socialist, or you wanted to have everybody has the equality. That is the difference. That's the ultimate, is the rivalry, is the democracy versus autocracy.
There's another challenge related to a civilizational state, because the term civilizational state sounds very nice, am I right? Because it goes back to this civilizational legacy. However, there's another angle to it. The problem with civilizational state is that there is always a mainstream idea or vision of what this civilization should be. So, for example, when we talk about the Chinese vision of the Chinese civilization, it's very selective. It's about Confucianism, it's about communism with Chinese characteristics. But, for example, there is no Muslim legacy. Even though there are millions of Muslims living in China, but somehow Islam and Islamic legacy is not defined or seen as part of Chinese civilization. Same with Christians, for instance, right? Or even foreigners who brought so many bad but also good things to China. Just before COVID pandemic, I went to Harbin in northeast China, and a friend of mine, a local Chinese person, was trying to show me places where Polish people used to live 100 years ago. And he was surprised to see that many boards which used to explain that this building was built by Polish people or Russian people or Jewish people, this was a pharmacy, this was a bank, and so on and so forth, they disappeared, or they were replaced by very short, simple descriptions which did not have those details as the old boards used to have. So the impression was that the Chinese authorities are trying to wipe out the history of foreigners who used to live there and who built that city and were a part of that city. There were thousands of Poles, Russians, Jews who were born, for instance, in Harbin, and for whom Russia, Poland, they were the new countries where they were forced to move afterwards, after the Chinese Civil War, and where they felt foreign because Harbin was their home and China was their homeland. So this is the negative aspect of a civilizational state. Another thing is that, according to this civilizational thinking, every country or every civilization is entitled to have different set of rules when it comes to morality, rules of conduct, internal policy, also different definition of human rights. This is what China is doing. China loves to talk about human rights. China brags about human rights. But the problem is that China's definition and understanding of human rights is very different from what the UN is trying to do and promote, what Western democracies are trying to do and promote. So here we have a big dissonance between China's thinking and democratic thinking, and China is not willing to adjust all these things or discuss all these things with the rest of the world. What we can see, what China is trying to do, for example, within the United Nations, is that China is trying to push for its own vision. You might say impose its own vision of human rights or international order on others, right? The way that it suits not the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party.
Dr. Antonia and Dr. Mendes, you have shared so much information. It has been very enlightening for all of us to listen to. In light of everything that has been shared, I have another question. What advice would you offer to Sri Lankan policymakers dealing with the complexities of Sino-American rivalry? What would you have to tell our viewers on this?
So I prefer not to get advice because when I talk to some Sri Lankan expert, they have the answers to everything. They know everything. So I'm very afraid to tell them what to do, what to say.
Let's call it suggestions. Let's call it suggestions.
Okay, that's called suggestion. Yes, because that's also a problem. When somebody said, I know Buddhism more than Buddha does, that's become a problem. So when the Sri Lankan expert say they know about the problem to Sri Lanka's issues and the America's issues, and then they have the answers. That is very, very disheartening to see. For us, we are a student of history. We are trying to be students, but they are become more like professors. They are telling how the other countries should run when they find out they cannot run their own countries. It's a very common thing that is happening, especially in the third world countries. This is a mindset that thanks to the British, they give that as a colonial mindset to think they are better than everything else because that's what the colonists told them. So they're still living in the colonial mindset. Having said that one aside the point, interesting thing is I always trying to analyze what went wrong in Sri Lanka. But if you look at China talk about the national rejuvenation. It is the Communist Party or President Xi Jinping. It is a national rejuvenation, revival of that nation. In America, when you're talking about freedom, liberty, pursuit of happiness, individual freedom. This is their narrative. This is the Chinese narrative. When you come to Sri Lanka, they know everything. And the problem is that they knowing everything is Sri Lanka put the private interest over the national interest. So if you look at how many families are become multimillionaires and billionaires, and their money is not even here. And they are in foreign accounts, but then ordinary Sri Lankan have to pay their debt. That's not fair. So this is become an issue. If you can put the national interest over your personal interest, personal enrichment, and that become a better country. For example, I mentioned this morning at the Foreign Ministry, I was talking to the new graduation class of our foreign service officers and all the 62 foreign our embassies around the world. One of the person asked the same kind of question. The simple answer is let your national interest come first before their personal interests. That's what happened to this country, and then you are still paying that debt for years to come. And these families who enrich themselves, they don't need to work for several generations for themselves, but at the expense of the poor Sri Lankan 22 million plus people. So that is the one part. how can Sri Lanka leaders think about Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka is never been an island. For 2,500 years, this never been an island. It is always connected to either to China or to Europe. We have diplomatic and commercial relations from the BC onward, and they are connected by ocean. There's never been an island in that respect. And you can see there's all the visitors came. Faxian came, then Swanshan came, wanted to come to Sri Lanka to study about Buddhism, but he stayed in Varanasi because of the domestic issues at that time. So, and other visitors Sri Lanka came in Muslim and Arabic visitors came to Sri Lanka, and European came to Sri Lanka. My thinking is both in China, in America's basis of economic development, betterment of their lives come from one word: trade. Chinese Silk Road went to the west because of the trade. South China Sea, Admiral Cheng Ho came to the peace in the world through trade. This is essentially the America's premise. In the US Constitution, it says the two words, Commerce Clause. Our entire American 50 states glued together by those two words in the US Constitution, Commerce Clause. When they think about our Commerce Clause, is the destiny for America. Trade is the destiny. What I recommend to the Sri Lankan policymakers, don't blame other countries because of you have problems. Don't blame Indians or to Americans or the Chinese or the European or the Maldives, or don't go to Bangladesh for money. We didn't have that kind of thing in the Sri Lankan history. Now you are begging money from the Bangladesh. Okay? So don't blame other people and have tap into the resources of this land. Swansen and Faxian came over here for trade, learning about the new knowledge. You gave that one. This Buddhism was their knowledge. In the Buddhist diplomacy came out of it. And all the trade, the British came and the Portuguese, Dutch came, commercial trade. And now China came and the America came. When you look at the Sri Lanka's export economy, it's largely based on the Sri Lankan economy based on the Western market. Not with the China. China is the one-sided of the economy. But the Sri Lankan economy money comes from the West. The textile export, or is the tourism, or the Sri Lankan workers were in the Middle East. Those are the major income earners. Think about strategically how can they use the trade to benefit this island, which I said this is not an island. And I would like to conclude, let the winds come from every angle through the doors and the windows of Sri Lanka. As long as this wind does not blow off your house. I didn't say that one actually, Mahatma Gandhi did. So it has a wisdom. So what I'm saying is Sri Lankan leaders and the policymakers don't look for far away. The resources and the talent and the knowledge is right here. And I would say the Buddhism is a repository. That is what the Emperor Asoka came, their son and daughter, to hear. You keep this resource. This is the talent. Then the Theravada Buddhism blossom to the world. It still continue in this one. Keep that resources. Use that one. You can be the trader. Buddhist exchanging knowledge to the world and do the trade and don't let this country blow away. So that is my general overall framework of thinking about what Sri Lankan leaders should do. And I would also suggest Sri Lanka should never be don't try to be a Singapore. It is bad idea. Because Singapore is completely rely on Malaysian water and the vegetables and the food. We don't have that problem. You don't rely on the Indian rice and other things coming on over here because you have enough things. And don't try to be a Dubai. okay, because this is not Dubai. This is our politician go and talk about, I wanted to make this country Singapore or Dubai. Why don't you do it Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan?
Make Sri Lanka, yes.
Yes, this is my message to the Sri Lankan leaders. And also tap into the Sri Lanka's best and brightest people are not in Sri Lanka, they are in around the world. They want to come and help. So that is why we are delighted. Ambassador Mahinda Samarasinghe asked us to come and meet with him. He's the former finance minister, I think, here. And he's one of the most active diplomat in the Sri Lankan Foreign Service. And he invited both of us to embassy, Sri Lankan embassy in Washington. He said, Patrick, you've been writing about, we want to tap you both, come to Sri Lanka. And would you please go to the defense ministry and also the foreign ministry? And would you please share with your ideas and so forth? So there are some brilliant people in Sri Lanka. Tap into these process. Don't blame anything because you have everything. We need to have creative thinkers. And we have that kind of creative thinkers. I think we need to tap into that source.
If I may share something from the Polish perspective,
Of course.
and also the perspective for Taiwan, where I also lived for some time, there are no shortcuts. Don't think that any country, be it China, India, United States, will just come and make you rich overnight with some investments. It doesn't work that way. Both of the examples of the countries I mentioned show that the road to stability, welfare is long, right? You have to go through a series of reforms to adjust, but it can be successful. Taiwan started off as an autocratic country, turned into one of the Asian tigers. And now it's not just a very prosperous country, but also according to various surveys and research, the 10th most stable and strongest democracy in the world, the number one democracy in Asia. Think about Poland. We started off in 1989 as a communist country, which just turned into a democratic country. And it took more than 30 years to actually try to catch up with the rest of the world, with the Western Europe. There is still a long way to go, but at least there is democracy, the rule of law, the respect for human rights, and optimism. This is probably the most important thing, because this stability, freedom, democracy, that gives you hope that you will wake up tomorrow morning in a better country, more stable country, more safer country for you and your children, right? Totalitarian regimes do not give you that. They can lure you with some visions of quick economic advancement, great investments, whatever. But if something goes wrong in your own private life, you're done. You don't have access to justice at courts because they are not free. They are not just as they should be, right? If you're nobody, you're literally nobody, right? Democracies give you a chance to speak up. They give you a chance to find justice if something happens to you. So this might sound trivial, right? Because in the end of the day, well, what we care most is about, to have a warm meal, right? So some people say, oh, we don't need to vote in democratic elections if we're hungry. That is true, right? I mean, we do have basic needs that have to be fulfilled in the first place. But let us not get lured by some populist visions. Let us not get lured by some autocratic but colorful and attractive visions. As Patrick said, let's cherish democracy, because this is not the perfect system, but the best one that humanity has ever come up with.
Thank you so much for sharing all these thoughts with us and being with us, and wishing you all the best.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You.
Thank you.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.